In this video, I'm gonna show you 3 techniques to level up your creativity without buying additional gear. In fact, all you need is your camera, your lens, and in a couple of these, maybe a tripod. My name is Pi, and I'm one of the founders of Lynn and Jersa Photography and SLRLounge.com. We're teaming up with Adorama to bring you a new series of photography tutorials called Master Your Craft right here on Adorama TV. So let's dive in. What's up, my friends? My name is Pi. Welcome back to Adorama TV. So glad to be here. Today, we're talking about 3 techniques with the gear that you already own. We're gonna dive into the first of them, which we call a wide aperture panoramic stitch. It's actually just that. It's literally grabbing a prime lens, I like the 50, shooting wide open, and then creating a panoramic set of images which you're gonna merge. Now, the benefit of this technique is creating a wide angle image, having a wide field of view, but with an impossibly shallow depth of field. It's impossibly shallow because if you actually had a lens that did this, it would be like shooting a 24mm lens at f.2. Such lenses just don't exist. So it's a really fun looking effect. It was actually popularized by Ryan Brenizer. Hence, it's often referred to as Brenizer technique. So let me show you how to do it. Number 1, grab your favorite prime. Like I said, mine is the 50 for this technique. 2, widen out the aperture. Now, I kind of like a sweet spot between f1.4 and f1.8, but try it out and see what fits for you. 3, shoot your subject at the right distance. Now, to simplify this process, I like to shoot just far enough where vertically my subject fits into an entire frame, okay? This makes it a bit easier to stitch these images together, especially when the subjects might be moving a bit. Along those lines, if you step too far away from your subject, well, you really lose the depth of field effect of your lens, and this really just becomes a panoramic stitch. 4, dial in your settings and then lock your focus to your subject. This is critical. 5, take your first shot. I usually like to start in the center and then I'll work my way left, work my way right. If I want to shoot up and include more vertical space or down, I would then go down, left, right. Have a process for this, but you're gonna shoot your entire set of panoramic images to stitch together. Keep in mind, this is gonna be a mega high megapixel image, okay? So I would recommend when you're doing this technique, if you're shooting raw, shoot in a medium or small raw format, shoot in something smaller than full raw, because you're gonna end up with so much data that it takes your computer forever to churn through 30 megapixel files, and especially if you're trying to merge 30 of them. So reduce the megapixel count down a little if you have that option. All right, so now we're back in Lightroom. I have a small sample set right here to show you guys. All you're gonna do is select that set of images, right click, go to Photo Merge, and click Panorama. Now, I love this function because it'll actually merge it as a DNG, and so it's still a raw file that's capable of having all the flexibility there in that file. Okay, so I'm gonna cancel out of this and show you guys what it would look like once merged. So here is that final effect. You get that impossibly shallow depth of field, a really cool looking image. For this particular image, I also lit our subject with a light. It had a Profoto light with the OCF softbox just to her left to create that nice little bit of lighting right on her face as well. This one, same thing. This one was shot actually natural. So play with different lighting effects. You can also play with different lenses. For example, this is using Brenizer technique out in Utah. And for this shot, I was actually using a tilt shift lens where I set the plane of focus right to their faces and allowed everything else to kind of fall out of focus to create this kind of ultra negative space type shot. So combine this technique with lighting, combine it with different lenses, and it's a super fun one to just get really wild and creative with. Number 2, pan to create or exaggerate motion. One of the easiest compositional tools that you have to make really cool looking images is simply to add motion into the shot. Panning is where we're gonna slow the shutter speed down to a sweet spot, okay? Then we're gonna move along with our subject, and as long as we're following at the same speed, well, the rest of the world is gonna blur away and you have a sharp subject like the images that you see in these examples. So now let's discuss how to do this technique. First, slow your shutter speed. And here I would again think kind of compositionally first. Just don't worry about exposure. Find the shutter speed that works best for your subject. faster moving subjects are going to need a faster shutter speed. Slower moving subjects are going to need a slower shutter speed. If it gets too slow, it'll be difficult to get your subject sharp. So between 1/10 and 1/50th is usually where I'm kind of working between when I'm doing this effect. Then from there, once you have the desired shutter speed, then set your exposure. So that's step number 2, set your exposure. Number 3, choose a focal point in the frame for where you'd like to frame your subject. So you want a focal point that's going to stay over your subject as you pan and track across the frame with them. 4, ideally, hold the camera close to your body. I do like to use the viewfinder for this effect. I find it to be a lot easier to track and follow than holding it away from your body, which can also introduce camera shake. 5, I want you to set your camera to high speed, and as you are panning, you're going to shoot through the entire sequence, as many images as you can, to sort of give yourself a better shot, a better chance of getting that sharp subject, that sharp image. Expect this technique to take a little bit of practice. You're gonna have a lot of throwaway images. Out of 20 images, you might have 1 or 2 that turn out just how you want them. So take it, practice with it, you'll get better with time. Number 3, shutter drag to show motion in a scene. This is one of my favorite portrait go-tos. So instead of moving with my subject to create the motion, what I'm doing is holding the camera still and slowing the shutter speed down enough where I can just simply show the motion of the surrounding environment. Here's how to do it. Step number 1, place the camera onto a tripod. Step number 2, dial in your composition and get your subjects exactly where you want them. Before you place them, make sure that you've instructed them to know that they're going to hold completely still through this process because your shutter speed is going to be open. Tell them that they're going to be blurry if they move. Number 3, slow the shutter speed enough to show the motion. Now again, depending on the motion, it's going to change the shutter speed. So before you play with exposure, get the right shutter speed. For water, you might want around half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds if you want that kind of wispy motion. You might even slow it down to 10, 15, 20 seconds if you want to create more fog like in this image. But with this image, we're actually doing it in 2 separate shots, one for the subject, one for the scene, and that's again why we're on a tripod, to make sure that everything stays still. Subjects can't hold still for more than 1 or 2 seconds without being blurry, okay? So just keep in mind, at a half second, 1 second, your subject can hold still. If not, you're gonna have to do it in 2 separate shots. One where you're shooting the subject, one where you're shooting for the background, and then you're gonna composite in post. But in city scenes like this, 1/10 of a second is enough to get the entire scene in motion. It's also quick enough that it's very easy to hold and be still for our subjects. Once your shutter speed is set and you've got the right look, that's when you're gonna dial in your final exposure settings. Set your aperture and your ISO appropriately. If you're doing this technique in broad daylight and you wanna get that shutter speed extended into the seconds, you notice that your aperture is all the way closed down, you notice that your ISO is already at that low setting, and it's still not dark enough, it's still too bright of an exposure, you're gonna need an ND filter. This, for example, is an ND filter. This is a Tiffin Water White HD ND. This is a 1.6, so I believe this is a 5-stop ND filter. You can also go up to a 10-stop ND filter. If you want to do long daytime shutter drags, you're gonna need a 10-stop. But for most things, I like my 5-stop. It's a good sweet spot. Finally, step 5, shoot away. From there, again, go to high speed and shoot an entire sequence. You want to make sure that you have the right motion in the environment and also that your subjects are frozen. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe to Adorama TV. If you guys would like to learn more about our A to Z education, check out slrloungeworkshops.com. And in the meanwhile, I'll see you guys back here next week. Bye-bye.